Mafia boss's mother mocked poor Maid, went silent when he asked her to run his financial empire. The grand mansion stood tall, a fortress of marble and glass, hiding the secrets of its occupants within. The golden chandeliers reflected light across a vast dining room, where the rich mingled with the powerful. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and freshly prepared gourmet dishes. But today, the atmosphere was different. Tension hung in the air like a storm cloud, and at the center of it all stood Maria, a young maid who had worked in the mansion for nearly 2 years. Her clothes, worn and simple, stood in stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her. Despite her humble appearance, Maria had an intelligence that few could comprehend. She had grown up in poverty, learned to survive in the harshest environments, and had built a quiet strength that few saw. But she had learned to stay invisible, never drawing attention to herself, always remaining in the background. It was the safest place for someone like her, someone who was just a maid in the eyes of the world. Today, though, she would no longer be invisible. As she entered the grand dining hall, she could feel the eyes of the guests on her. They were laughing, talking, sipping on their drinks. But to Maria, their laughter felt like a weight she couldn't escape. The mafia boss's mother, a woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper words, turned her gaze toward Maria as she approached the table. Her lips curled into a sneer. "Look at you," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Just a maid. What are you doing here? You don't belong in the presence of such distinguished people." The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward Maria, who felt her heart race. She had endured insults before, but this was different. This was not just any insult. This was the mafia boss's mother, a woman who had the power to ruin lives with a single word. Maria's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her head high. She had learned a long time ago not to show weakness. She continued walking, silently, as the room waited for her to respond. But the words never came. The silence lingered, heavy and uncomfortable, as the guests exchanged awkward glances. Then, from across the room, a voice cut through the tension. "Mother, enough," came the commanding tone of the mafia boss. It was a voice that commanded attention, a voice that could bring empires to their knees. All eyes turned toward him. Dominic Romano, the youngest and most powerful mafia boss in New York, stood at the entrance of the room, his presence alone enough to silence the room. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a black suit that seemed to absorb the light, his sharp features set in a permanent mask of control. His eyes, dark and calculating, fixed on his mother. "Don't speak to her like that," he said coldly. His voice, though calm, held an authority that no one dared challenge. The mother's eyes widened in shock. For the first time in her life, she was caught off guard. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dominic stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I said, don't speak to her like that," he repeated, his words sharp, almost cutting. "She is more than just a maid. And if you can't respect that, then I will take over the management of the family's business. She will run the empire from now on." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The guests were silent, their faces a mix of disbelief and awe. Maria, meanwhile, stood frozen, her mind racing. She had never expected this. She had never imagined that someone like Dominic, the ruthless mafia boss who controlled the city's underworld, would stand up for her. For a moment, she wondered if this was some kind of joke. But there was no joking in Dominic's voice. His decision was final. The mother's face flushed with rage, but she could do nothing. The room remained still as the tension mounted. Maria, still in shock, slowly turned to Dominic, who met her gaze with an unexpected warmth. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice soft, almost comforting. Maria blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. This was the same man who had crushed rival families with a single word, the same man whose name struck fear into the hearts of anyone who heard it. And now, he was asking if she was okay. I don't know what to say," Maria stammered, still trying to process the surreal turn of events. Dominic smiled faintly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "You just need to know that you're not invisible anymore." The words hit her like a wave. For the first time in her life, Maria felt seen, truly seen. She had always been invisible, just a maid, a worker in the background. But now, everything was about to change. Maria stood frozen in the grand dining hall, her breath caught in her chest. The unexpected twist of events seemed surreal. Just moments ago, she had been mocked by the Mafia boss's mother, a woman who had the power to ruin lives with just a few words. Yet now, here was Dominic Romano, the most powerful man in the city, offering her control over his empire. It felt like a dream she didn't think she deserved. She had always been the quiet one, the maid who cleaned the floors, served the meals, and disappeared into the shadows. The idea of running an empire was as foreign to her as the luxurious world she had found herself in. But Dominic wasn't just offering her a chance. He was giving her a command. "You will run the empire," he had said, his words firm, without hesitation. As his gaze met hers, there was no hint of doubt. For a moment, Maria stood there, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't just about taking over a business. It was about changing everything she had known. It was about her stepping into a world she had never imagined, a world where she was seen as more than just a maid. "Are you sure about this?" Maria asked, her voice trembling slightly, unsure if this was some sort of test. "I'm not the person you think I am." Dominic's expression softened. "You are exactly who I need. You understand things that no one else does. You see what others don't. That's what makes you different." Maria felt the weight of his words, but doubt still lingered in her mind. She had spent so much of her life trying to stay out of the spotlight, trying to stay invisible, that the thought of taking charge was overwhelming. But deep down, she knew that this was an opportunity that might never come again. It wasn't just about power or wealth. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above the limits others had set for her. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Maria admitted, her hands shaking slightly. "I've never done anything like this." "You don't need to be ready," Dominic replied, his voice calm but insistent. "You will learn as you go. I will help you, but you have the potential. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Maria felt a spark of something she hadn't felt before, confidence. For the first time, she wasn't just Maria the maid. She was Maria, someone with a purpose. "What do I do first?" she asked, her voice steadier now. Dominic smiled, a rare gesture that softened his usually stern face. "First, you'll meet with the board. You'll need to prove yourself to them. They won't trust you at first, but they will respect you once they see your intelligence. You're smart, Maria. Smarter than most of the men in that room." As he spoke, Maria realized something. This wasn't just about running the business. It was about gaining respect, not just from the board, but from herself. She had spent so long feeling small, invisible, that the idea of commanding respect was foreign to her. But now, it felt like something she could actually achieve. The board meeting was scheduled for the next morning. Maria spent the night preparing, reviewing documents, and rehearsing what she would say. She had no formal training in business, but she had an instinct for numbers, for understanding people, for seeing through the lies and the facades. She had learned all of this the hard way, growing up in a world where survival was the only thing that mattered. The next day, Maria entered the boardroom with her head held high. The men in suits looked at her with skepticism, some even with outright disdain. They had all worked under Dominic's command for years, and none of them expected a young maid to take over their operations. But Maria didn't flinch. She stood in front of them, calm and collected, ready to prove that she was more than just a maid. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice steady. "I understand that you're all used to things being a certain way, but I'm here to tell you that the old way of doing things is over. We need to evolve. We need to think outside the box if we want to stay ahead." The men exchanged looks, unsure of what to make of this bold young woman. But Maria pressed on, outlining her vision for the company. She spoke about expanding into new markets, about leveraging their resources in ways they had never considered. As she spoke, she could see their resistance starting to waver. She wasn't just talking. She was showing them that she knew the business, that she had the intelligence and the drive to lead. By the end of the meeting, the room had shifted. The men who had doubted her now respected her. It wasn't just her ideas, it was her presence, her confidence, her ability to command respect. Maria had done it. She had taken the first step into a world she never thought she could enter. But this was just the beginning. As she left the boardroom, Dominic was waiting for her in the hallway, a look of approval in his eyes. "You did well," he said, his voice softer than usual. "But this is just the beginning. Now, you'll face even greater challenges. Are you ready for them?" Maria nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. "I'm ready." This was her moment. The moment she would prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she was more than just a maid. She was Maria Romano, and she would run the empire. The morning after her successful board meeting, Maria sat at her desk in the high-rise office that had become her new home. It still felt surreal, the weight of what had happened in the past 24 hours sinking in. She had taken the reins of an empire, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just the maid, the quiet servant who worked behind the scenes. She was Maria Romano, the new head of the family business. As she reviewed the financial reports in front of her, Maria couldn't help but marvel at the sheer scale of the operations. The numbers were staggering, but what surprised her more was how easily she understood them. The business, the logistics, the strategy, it all made sense to her. She had grown up learning to survive with little, and in some strange way, that had prepared her for this. She understood sacrifice, strategy, and how to make every dollar count. But still, the weight of it all was immense. She had to prove herself to more than just the board. She had to prove herself to Dominic, to his mother, and to herself. Over the next few days, Maria worked tirelessly, making decisions that seemed almost too big for someone who had once scrubbed floors. She attended meetings with lawyers, met with the heads of various departments, and oversaw the distribution of resources. But there was one thing she hadn't anticipated: how isolating it would feel. As the days passed, Maria found herself more and more distant from the people around her. The board members respected her, but they didn't see her as one of them. She was still the maid, in their eyes, just playing dress-up in a world she didn't belong to. Even Dominic, who had given her this opportunity, seemed distant. He was always watching her, observing her every move. It wasn't that he doubted her abilities. It was more that he was testing her, seeing if she would crack under the pressure. And at times, Maria felt as if she were about to. She missed the simplicity of her old life. Even with the luxury, the power, and the wealth, there was something hollow about it all. She longed for the days when she had no expectations placed on her, when all she had to do was work and keep her head down. One evening, as she was walking through the mansion's marble halls, lost in thought, she bumped into Dominic. He was standing in the hallway, his arms crossed, his gaze intense. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice low. Maria stopped, startled by his presence. "I'm just trying to understand all of this," she replied, gesturing to the opulence around her. "I never expected any of this. It's overwhelming." Dominic's gaze softened, just for a moment. "I know it's a lot, but you've proven you can handle it. You're not just some maid anymore, Maria. You're more than that. You're the future of this family." The words should have felt comforting, but they didn't. Instead, they made her feel more uncertain than ever. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this future. But as she stood there, looking at Dominic, she realized something. He wasn't just testing her. He was giving her the tools to succeed. He was pushing her because he knew that she had potential. She could either embrace that potential or let it slip away. The next morning, Maria made her decision. She would embrace it. She would stop looking back and start looking forward. She would be the leader she was meant to be. The first major test came sooner than she expected. A rival family, the Salviatis, had begun encroaching on their territory. They were making moves to take control of several lucrative deals that Maria had just signed. It was a blatant challenge to her authority, and she knew that if she didn't act quickly, it would weaken her position. Dominic gave her the go-ahead to handle the situation herself. "This is your fight now, Maria," he said. "Handle it how you see fit." Maria knew that this was the moment to prove herself, not just to Dominic, but to everyone. She wasn't going to let anyone take what was hers. The Salviatis were ruthless, but Maria had something they didn't. She understood people. She knew how to play the game, how to make people think they had the upper hand while she controlled the outcome. She spent the next few days negotiating fiercely with the rival family, playing them against each other and using their weaknesses to her advantage. By the end of the week, the Salviatis had backed down, agreeing to a deal that was favorable for her family. As the negotiations concluded, Maria felt a rush of triumph. She had done it. She had protected the empire and proven that she was not just a figurehead. She was a force to be reckoned with. Later that evening, Dominic came to her office, his face unreadable as usual. But this time, there was something different in his eyes: respect. "You handled that well," he said, his voice soft. "I knew you could." Maria nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She was no longer just a maid. She was a leader, a decision-maker, and she had earned her place at the top. But as the night wore on, Maria knew that this was only the beginning. The empire was hers to run now, and she had just proven that she was more than capable of leading it. After weeks of nonstop work, Maria had begun to feel the weight of her responsibilities pressing on her more than ever. As she sat in her private office late one evening, looking over yet another set of financial reports, she realized that the world she had once dreamed of, the world of power and wealth, was now hers to navigate. But it wasn't as glamorous as she had imagined. There were days when it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers, and the pressure to constantly prove herself was exhausting. Dominic had been by her side, guiding her, but also keeping a watchful eye, as if he were waiting for her to falter. The tension between them had begun to grow. He would often send her small, cryptic messages, checking on her progress, but his tone was always distant, detached. Maria couldn't help but wonder if this was part of his plan, to push her to the edge, to see how far she would go. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Maria stood on the balcony of her office, gazing out at the city lights. She had come so far, but the doubts were still there. Was she really ready to take on the role of leading an empire, of stepping into the shoes of a mafia boss? She had never asked for this power, never dreamed of controlling the family business. She had simply wanted a way out, a chance at something better. But now, she was trapped in a world of ruthless deals, endless expectations, and no way out. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Maria hesitated for a moment before nodding and walking toward him. As she closed the door behind them, Dominic took a seat across from her, his dark eyes studying her carefully. "You've done well," he began, his voice softer than usual. "But I've noticed something. You're not the same Maria you were when I first brought you in. You've changed, and not just because of the power." Maria felt a pang of discomfort at his words. She wasn't sure what he meant, but she knew there was truth in them. She had changed. The fear and uncertainty that had once consumed her were starting to fade, replaced by something darker, more calculating. But was it really her? Or had the world around her molded her into something she never wanted to be? "What do you mean?" Maria asked, trying to mask the unease in her voice. "You've become more ruthless," Dominic said, leaning forward. "More like the people you're trying to lead. You're making decisions. That effect lives without a second thought. I know you want to prove yourself, but don't lose yourself in the process." His words hit Maria harder than she expected. She had always prided herself on being different, on maintaining her humanity in a world that demanded cruelty and coldness. But lately, she had felt herself slipping. The longer she stayed in this world, the more she had started to act like the very people she had once despised. "I'm doing what I have to do," she replied, her voice steady, though inside, she felt a storm brewing. "I'm doing what it takes to keep this empire running. I didn't ask for any of this, but I have to protect it. I have to protect us." Dominic nodded slowly, as if contemplating her words. "I understand that, Maria. But what happens when you lose sight of who you are? When the empire becomes your only focus and everything else fades into the background?" Maria was silent, her mind racing. She had been so focused on her survival, on proving herself, that she hadn't stopped to consider the cost. What had she become in the process? And more importantly, what was she willing to sacrifice to maintain this power? As she looked at Dominic, she realized that he was right. She was becoming someone else, someone who was no longer afraid of the consequences, someone who could make decisions without feeling the weight of them. Was this the price of power? "I won't lose myself," Maria said, more to herself than to Dominic. "But I won't back down either." Dominic studied her for a moment, then stood up and walked toward the window. "That's exactly what I'm worried about," he muttered, almost to himself. "You're starting to think like me." Maria stood, feeling a strange sense of both pride and fear at his words. She had always seen Dominic as the embodiment of control, the cold, ruthless leader who did whatever it took to win. And now, she was starting to understand why he was the way he was. But that didn't mean she wanted to be him. She had come this far, but there was a part of her that still held on to the person she had been before, all the dreams of a different life, of something better. But could she really walk away from the power she had gained? As she watched Dominic walk out of the room, leaving her to her thoughts, Maria felt more conflicted than ever. She had the empire, the power, the respect, but at what cost? And was it worth losing herself to keep it? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as Maria stood alone, the weight of her choices pressing down on her more than ever. Maria's nights had become increasingly restless. She had won the respect of the board. She had outsmarted her rivals. And yet, each time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone unfamiliar. The powerful, calculated woman who led the family business wasn't who she had imagined herself becoming. The more she took on, the more she realized that power came at a cost. Her soul, perhaps, and her humanity. The warmth that had once filled her heart was now shadowed by a growing detachment. She began to wonder if she had made a mistake. It had been a week since her conversation with Dominic, and though he had given her space, the tension between them was palpable. Maria didn't know how to feel. She wanted to prove to Dominic that she could be the leader he expected her to be, but the constant demands from all sides were starting to take a toll. The empire she now ruled had many factions, each with its own interests, and it was up to her to keep them in balance. Her mornings were filled with meetings and phone calls, while her evenings were consumed by endless paperwork. She had become a workaholic, and the lines between business and her personal life had blurred. As much as she pushed herself, Maria couldn't help but feel the weight of the loneliness that seemed to follow her everywhere. There was no one she could truly trust, no one she could confide in. She had once been a maid, a woman who understood what it meant to have nothing and work for everything. But now, she was surrounded by luxury and power, yet she felt emptier than ever. One evening, after another grueling day, Maria found herself walking down the dimly lit halls of the mansion, lost in thought. She was heading to her office when she suddenly heard a voice from behind. "Maria," came Dominic's voice, calm but firm. She turned around to see him standing in the shadows, his arms crossed, his gaze steady. "We need to talk." Maria felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. She had known this conversation was coming. Dominic had been distant lately, and his rare visits to her office only seemed to increase the tension. "What about?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her heart was racing. "It's about the future," he replied. "I've been watching how you've been handling things. You've made some impressive moves, but I'm concerned." Maria froze. She had worked so hard to gain his trust, to prove herself worthy of the position she had been given. But now, his words cut through her confidence like a knife. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. Dominic stepped forward, his gaze softening ever so slightly. "You're pushing too hard, Maria. You're losing sight of what matters. This isn't just about controlling the family business. It's about protecting what we've built, about staying true to the legacy." Maria felt a pang of guilt. She had been so focused on proving herself, on showing Dominic that she could handle the responsibility, that she had forgotten why she had taken on the mantle in the first place. "I'm doing what needs to be done," she said, her voice steady, though the cracks in her armor were beginning to show. Dominic shook his head slowly. "And that's exactly the problem. You're doing what needs to be done, not what's right." His words stung, but deep down, Maria knew he was right. She had become so consumed by the business that she had forgotten the people who made it all possible, the loyal employees, the family who had supported her, and most importantly, herself. "I don't know what you want from me, Dominic," she said, the frustration in her voice now impossible to hide. "I'm doing my best." "I know you are," he said quietly. "But you've started to forget what it means to lead with honor. You can't keep making decisions based on fear or control. That's not who you are." Maria took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had been so focused on keeping up with the expectations, on maintaining her position, that she had let go of everything she once believed in. "I don't know how to fix it," she admitted, the weight of her words sinking in. Dominic reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly warm. "Start by remembering who you are," he said softly. "You were never meant to be like them. You've always had the heart of a leader, Maria. Don't lose that." His words lingered in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone in this. She had someone who believed in her, someone who could guide her when she had lost her way. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll do better," she promised. "I'll find my way back." As Dominic walked away, Maria stood in the hallway, her mind racing. The challenges ahead of her were only growing more intense, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could face them. She would be the leader Dominic had always believed she could be, strong, but true to herself. The empire she had inherited wasn't just about power or wealth. It was about protecting the people she cared about, honoring the legacy that had been built, and most importantly, remembering who she was. She wasn't just Maria Romano, the Mafia boss. She was Maria Romano, a woman who had the power to change the world, but only if she stayed true to herself. Maria woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing across the desk, the harsh ring cutting through the quiet of the morning. It was still early, but there was no such thing as a day off in her world now. The empire she had inherited was always in motion, always demanding her attention. As she rubbed her eyes and grabbed the phone, she saw a series of urgent messages from her most trusted advisor, Alex. "We have a situation," the first message read. "The Salviati family is moving in again, but this time, it's personal." Maria frowned. The Salviatis were a problem that had been dealt with before, but this was different. Their tactics were more aggressive now, and she had heard rumors that they were looking to target not just her business, but her family as well. This wasn't a typical power grab. This was war. She had to act fast. As the phone continued to buzz, she quickly read through the rest of the messages. "They've moved into the neighborhoods surrounding the mansion. They've started making threats. We need to handle this today." Maria felt her pulse quicken. She had fought hard to get to this point, and now the threat of losing it all was looming again. She couldn't let fear control her. She had worked too hard to let someone else take her place. Not now. Not ever. Maria quickly texted Alex back, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. "Prepare the team. We move tonight. Get the best men, and make sure they know what's at stake." She stood up, the weight of the decision settling into her chest. It was one thing to lead a business, but when it came to protecting everything she had worked for, the stakes were higher than ever. Dominic had told her to trust her instincts, but right now, those instincts were telling her to prepare for battle. As the day went on, Maria gathered her most trusted allies. They had always been loyal, but loyalty was a fragile thing when the danger felt as real as it did now. She could see it in their eyes. Concern, yes, but also a determination to stand by her side. No one was backing down, not after all they had been through together. As night fell, Maria made her way to the war room, a room deep inside the mansion that had been designed for moments like this. Maps of the city were spread out across the table, the areas of conflict marked in red. Maria studied the map carefully, her mind working through the best possible strategy. The Salviatis had a reputation for being ruthless, but Maria had learned a lot since taking over. She knew how to play this game. She had the resources, the intelligence, and now, she was ready to use them. "We need to take the initiative," Maria said, her voice calm but firm. "We don't wait for them to make the first move. We show them we are in control." The room was silent as her men nodded in agreement. Maria's plan was bold, but it was their only option. If they hesitated, they would lose everything. "Alex, I want you to coordinate the men on the ground. Make sure we have eyes on all their movements. Keep them off balance." "Got it," Alex replied. "We'll move quickly. I'll keep you updated." Maria turned to the others. "The rest of you, prepare the vehicles. We'll leave in an hour. Stay sharp. No mistakes." As they all moved into action, Maria stood still for a moment, allowing herself a breath. This was what it meant to lead, to protect, to fight, to ensure that everything she had built wouldn't crumble. She had already come so far, and now she was ready to protect her empire at any cost. The moment she had feared had arrived, but it also gave her a sense of clarity. There was no going back now. The battle for control was on. The night air was cool as Maria stepped into the sleek black SUV, flanked by her most trusted men. They were ready, determined to follow her lead, no matter what it took. The drive to the location was tense, the silence in the car only broken by the occasional instructions over the radio. As they approached the Salviati's territory, Maria could feel the adrenaline surge in her veins. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was personal. She had worked too hard to let anyone take it from her. The Salviatis would learn that. As they reached the edge of their area, Maria looked out the window, her expression hardening. She could see the Salviati's men lurking in the shadows, waiting for a confrontation. They thought they had the upper hand, but Maria wasn't going to give it to them. She stepped out of the vehicle, her heels clicking on the pavement. The moment she did, the Salviati's men stood up, their eyes narrowing at the sight of her. But Maria wasn't afraid. She was ready. "We're here to send a message," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is my city, and you will never take what's mine." The confrontation was swift, but decisive. With her team at her side, Maria took control of the situation, outsmarting the Salviati's men at every turn. By the time it was over, the Salviati family had been pushed back, their plans thwarted, their power diminished. Maria had won. As they made their way back to the mansion, Maria sat quietly in the car, her mind racing. It wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about proving to herself that she could be the leader she had always hoped to be. But as the city lights faded in the distance, Maria knew that the war was far from over. The Salviatis wouldn't stop, and neither would she. The days following, the confrontation with the Salviati family felt like a whirlwind for Maria. Though the immediate threat had been dealt with, the consequences were far from over. She had sent a strong message, but the power struggle was far from finished. The Salviati family was known for its ruthlessness, and Maria had no illusions about the fact that they would retaliate. They were waiting for an opportunity to strike back, and she had to be ready. One evening, as Maria sat at her desk going over some new reports, Alex entered the room with a grim expression. "We have a problem," he said. Maria looked up, her pulse quickening. "What now?" "There's been a breach," Alex continued. "It's one of our own. Someone on the inside is leaking information to the Salviatis." Maria's stomach sank. She had known that trust would be her biggest challenge in this world, but hearing that someone close to her was betraying her made it feel personal. She had worked so hard to build a team she could rely on, and now, one of them had turned against her. "Do we know who?" Maria asked, her voice cold and calculated. Alex hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Not yet, but we're tracing the leaks. It won't take long to find out who's behind this." Maria stood up, the weight of the situation settling over her. A betrayal of this magnitude couldn't go unpunished. She had already shown the Salviatis that she wouldn't back down, but now she had to prove to her own people that loyalty wasn't negotiable. "Get them, Alex. Find out who it is, and make them pay," she ordered, her voice steely. Alex nodded and left the room, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts. As much as she hated the idea of betrayal, she knew it was part of the world she had chosen to enter. The Mafia business wasn't about honor or friendship, it was about power, and those who didn't respect that would be eliminated. Maria had learned that lesson the hard way. She had worked hard to get to where she was, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away from her. The next few days were filled with tension as Alex and his team worked to track down the source of the leaks. Maria spent every waking moment strategizing, thinking ahead, trying to anticipate the Salviati family's next move. She knew that once they found out about the betrayal, the Salviatis would strike harder. The longer she waited, the more vulnerable she became. But there was something else nagging at her mind. As she sat at her desk late one night, her phone rang. It was Dominic. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious. Maria's heart skipped a beat. Dominic had been distant ever since their last conversation, and she hadn't heard from him much since. She wasn't sure if he was trying to test her again or if he was genuinely concerned. Either way, she knew this conversation was important. "Where are you?" she asked, standing up from her desk. "I'm on my way," he replied, and the line went dead. Maria couldn't help but wonder what he wanted to discuss. She had made her stance clear, and yet, there was still something in his eyes that unsettled her. She had come so far, but she wasn't sure where this path would lead her, and Dominic's silence only added to the uncertainty. An hour later, Dominic arrived at the mansion, his presence as commanding as always. He walked into her office with the same steely gaze, but this time, there was something different in his eyes, a mixture of concern and something else she couldn't quite place. "I've been watching you," he began, his voice softer than usual, "and I'm starting to worry. You're becoming too much like them." Maria narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Dominic paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "You're acting like the business is everything. Like it's the only thing that matters. I know what this world can do to people, but you're losing yourself in the process. You've become so focused on power that you're forgetting why you started this in the first place." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had always prided herself on staying true to who she was. But now, she wasn't so sure. Was she losing herself? Was she becoming just like the people she had sworn never to be? I'm not losing myself, Maria said, trying to steady her voice. I'm doing what needs to be done. I can't afford to make mistakes. Dominic stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. That's what I'm afraid of, Maria. You're so focused on protecting the empire that you're losing sight of what really matters, yourself. Maria felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had worked so hard, fought so fiercely, and now, for the first time, she questioned everything she had built. Was it worth it? Was all the power and control worth losing the part of herself that had always cared about more than just survival? She wasn't sure anymore. What do I do? She asked quietly. Dominic reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. Start by remembering who you are, he said softly. You're not just a mafia boss. You're Maria. Don't lose her. The words felt like a lifeline, a reminder of everything she had once believed in. But Maria knew that the road ahead would be difficult. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The Salviatis wouldn't stop, and neither would she. But this time, she would find a balance, a way to protect her empire without losing herself in the process. The days following her conversation with Dominic felt like a turning point for Maria. She had been forced to look inwards, to confront the kind of leader she had become, and whether it was the person she had intended to be. The world of power, greed, and survival had begun to change her. And now, more than ever, she needed to find a way to reconnect with the part of herself that had once been driven by something more than just control. As much as she respected Dominic's advice, she knew that this was her battle to fight, her life to shape. In the days that followed, Maria took action. She started to shift her approach to leadership. It wasn't about forcing people into submission or proving herself through endless victories. It was about building trust, loyalty, and respect, not through fear, but through integrity. She spent hours meeting with various members of her team, listening to their concerns and ideas. For the first time, she saw them not as subordinates, but as partners. She needed them just as much as they needed her. It was a revelation that transformed the way she operated. But despite her newfound resolve, the weight of the empire she had inherited continued to press down on her. The Salviati family, though temporarily pushed back, were far from finished. Maria knew it was only a matter of time before they launched another attack, and, this time, they would be more prepared. She needed to get ahead of them, to make sure they couldn't take advantage of her vulnerabilities. One afternoon, as Maria reviewed more financial reports, her phone buzzed. It was Alex. We've got movement, the message read. They're gearing up for something big. We need to act now. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She quickly texted back, set up a meeting. We'll discuss the next move tonight. The plan was set into motion. Maria called her closest allies to gather in the war room. There was no more time to waste. She had learned that leadership required decisive action. And this time, she wasn't going to wait for the enemy to strike first. As the team gathered around the table, Maria felt the familiar sense of responsibility settle over her. She had led them before, but this time was different. There was no fear in her heart, only a quiet confidence. She had learned that true power came not from control, but from understanding and strategy. We have one shot at this, Maria said, addressing the group. The Salviatis are planning something big. I want eyes everywhere. We need to be prepared for anything. Alex, you're in charge of surveillance. I want a full report by the end of the day. The rest of you, get into position. We strike when they least expect it. The room was filled with a palpable sense of urgency as her team sprang into action. Maria's instructions were clear, and they trusted her. It was a turning point for her leadership. She had stopped viewing herself as an outsider and embraced her role as the head of the family business. The hours passed quickly as they made their final preparations. Maria's mind raced with thoughts of what was to come, but she felt a calm determination that had eluded her for so long. She knew that this was what she had been building towards. The Salviatis would learn the hard way that they had underestimated her. As night fell, the team moved out, and Maria was once again surrounded by her loyal men. This time, there was no uncertainty. She wasn't fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting to protect everything she had built, and to prove that she was more than just a pawn in a game of power. They arrived at the location, a large building, on the outskirts of the city where the Salviatis were making their move. Maria had known it was coming, and she wasn't about to let them take control without a fight. "Everyone stay sharp," she instructed. "We go in together. No one acts alone." The team nodded, their expressions hard with focus. Maria led the way, her footsteps steady, each one a symbol of her unwavering resolve. The tension in the air was thick as they approached the building. They could hear the low hum of conversation and the faint sound of footsteps inside. The Salviatis were waiting, but so was Maria. As they entered, Maria's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was control. She knew what she had to do. The confrontation was swift and decisive. With the element of surprise on her side, Maria's team took control of the situation, overwhelming the Salviati's men with precision and skill. It wasn't a bloody battle. It wasn't a war of violence. It was a strategic victory, a calculated move that crippled their operations and sent a clear message to the Salviati family. Maria was not to be underestimated. When it was over, Maria stood in the center of the room, her team surrounding her. The Salviatis were defeated, their plans in ruins. She had done it. She had protected her empire, her family, and herself. But more importantly, she had proved that she was the one in control. As they returned to the mansion, Maria felt a sense of relief. It was a victory, but it wasn't the end. The Salviatis would regroup, and there would be more challenges ahead. But Maria was ready. She had found her footing. She had learned what it meant to lead with honor and strength, and she knew that she would never stop fighting to protect everything she had worked for. The empire was hers, and she would not let anyone take it from her. The aftermath of the Salviati family's defeat weighed heavily on Maria. Despite the immediate victory, the tension in the air was palpable. She had won the battle, but she knew the war was far from over. As the days passed, Maria found herself constantly watching her back, knowing that the Salviatis wouldn't give up so easily. She had made her move, but now she had to be ready for the inevitable retaliation. The mansion, once a symbol of power and control, now felt like a gilded cage. Maria was trapped in a world where every decision carried immense weight, and every move could lead to her downfall. She had taken control of the family business, but at what cost? The pressure of leadership was becoming unbearable, and she began to question whether she was truly the right person for the job. One evening, as she sat alone in her office, staring at the city lights from the window, a knock on the door broke her thoughts. She looked up to find Dominic standing in the doorway. His usual stoic expression softened slightly. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had grown accustomed to Dominic's presence, but lately, their interactions had become more strained. There was a distance between them now, an unspoken tension that neither of them had addressed. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dominic stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I've been watching you," he said, his gaze intense but not unkind. "You've been making the right moves, but I can see the toll it's taking on you." Maria didn't say anything, but her mind raced. She had been trying to hold everything together, to prove that she was strong enough to lead. But the weight of the empire she had inherited was starting to crush her. "I know you're carrying a lot," Dominic continued, his voice softer now. "But you don't have to do it alone. You've been pushing everyone away, including me." Maria felt a pang of guilt at his words. She had been so focused on the business, on proving herself, that she had isolated herself from those who cared about her. "I didn't mean to," she said quietly, her eyes lowering to the desk. I don't know how to handle it all. The pressure, the decisions. It's overwhelming." Dominic walked over to her, his presence calming, but still intense. "You've been carrying the weight of this empire on your shoulders, Maria. But you're not alone. You've got me, and you've got the people who believe in you. You don't have to do this by yourself." Maria looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time in days. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't alone. She had people who cared about her, who supported her, even when she couldn't see it. The walls she had built around herself began to crumble. "I don't know how to balance everything," Maria admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm afraid that I'm losing myself in all of this." Dominic's expression softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to feel lost sometimes. But don't let fear control you. You've already proven that you're capable of leading. You just need to trust yourself again." Maria nodded, taking a deep breath. It felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe again. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dominic gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to thank me. You've already done the hard part. Now, it's time to let others help." As he left the room, Maria sat there in silence, reflecting on his words. She had spent so much time trying to do everything herself, trying to prove that she was strong enough to carry the burden. But in that moment, she realized that true strength wasn't about carrying the load alone. It was about knowing when to lean on those who cared for you. The next morning, Maria took a step back from the constant demands of the business. She spent time with her team, offering guidance and support, but also allowing herself to listen and learn from those around her. For the first time, she truly understood the power of collaboration. It wasn't just about making decisions. It was about building trust and working together to achieve a common goal. The Salviati family's threat still loomed over her, but for the first time, Maria felt ready to face it. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people by her side, people who believed in her, and people she could trust. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Maria knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. She would lead with strength, integrity, and the support of those who stood with her. The empire she had fought so hard to build was hers to protect, but now, she knew that the key to her success wasn't just in her hands. It was in the hands of everyone around her, working together toward a common future. The sun had barely risen when Maria received the news. The Salviati family had launched another attack. This time, it was personal. They had gone after her family, targeting her closest allies, and even going so far as to sabotage the legitimate businesses that kept her empire running. Maria stood in her office, staring at the report in disbelief. She had known they would strike again, but she hadn't expected it to be so direct, so cruel. The Salviatis had crossed a line, and now Maria knew that there would be no turning back. It was no longer about securing her position or protecting her empire. This was about revenge. They had made it personal, and she would respond in kind. As she stood there, processing the gravity of the situation, her mind raced. This was exactly the kind of battle she had been trying to avoid. A war between families was a war with no rules, no mercy. The Salviati family had no boundaries, no honor. But Maria had learned that in this world, survival depended on the ability to adapt, to outwit your enemies before they even knew what hit them. She wasn't going to sit idly by and let them destroy everything she had worked for. She would show them that underestimating her was their greatest mistake. Maria called her inner circle together, each one of them silently aware that the stakes had just been raised. Alex, her most trusted advisor, stood by her side, his expression grim but determined. "What do we know about their movements?" Maria asked, her voice calm, yet filled with an unmistakable edge. "They're making their move in the financial sector," Alex replied. "They've already bribed several of our key contacts and are trying to convince them to side with them. We've lost a few deals, and they're trying to control the city's trade routes." Maria's eyes narrowed. The Salviatis had always been involved in illegal activities, but this felt different. They were no longer just making power plays. They were trying to break her, to take everything from her, piece by piece. But Maria had never been one to back down. "We're not going to wait for them to take more," she said firmly. "We're going to hit them where it hurts." She turned to her team. "We're going to shut them down. Every illegal business, every deal they've made in the last year, we're going to take it all." The room went silent, but the tension was electric. No one spoke, but every member of her team understood the gravity of what she was asking. They had all seen what Maria was capable of, and they knew that when she said something, she meant it. There would be no mercy. Maria turned to Alex. "Set up a meeting with the heads of our strongest allies. I want the Salviatis out of this city, and I want it done now." Alex nodded and left the room to carry out her orders. Maria stared out the window, watching the city come to life in the early morning light. It was a city she had fought for, a city she had built. The Salviatis had made a fatal mistake, thinking they could intimidate her, break her spirit. But Maria knew what it meant to lose everything. She had been a maid, a nobody, and now she was the ruler of this empire. No one would take it from her, not without a fight. Later that day, Maria sat with her allies, planning their next move. The meeting was filled with heated discussions and tense exchanges. It was clear that the Salviatis had spread their influence far and wide, But Maria wasn't willing to back down. She had learned how to play this game, and she would do whatever it took to win. "We'll strike tonight," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "We'll take their financial stronghold, cut off their supply lines, and make it impossible for them to operate." There was no hesitation in her words. Maria's allies, though wary of the risks, followed her lead. They trusted her, and they knew that when Maria spoke, action followed. By the time the sun set, Maria's team was ready. The plan had been set into motion, and they moved swiftly, quietly, without leaving a trace. The Salviatis never saw it coming. By the time they realized they had been outmaneuvered, it was too late. Maria had struck at the heart of their operations, crippling their control over the city. She had sent a message that could not be ignored. She was in charge now, and anyone who threatened her would face the consequences. As the night wore on and the dust settled, Maria stood in the shadows, watching the city she had fought so hard to protect. Her empire was still standing, and the Salviatis had been dealt a blow they would not soon recover from. But Maria knew that this was just one battle in a war that had only just begun. The Salviatis were down, but they were not out. And Maria had learned that in this world, you could never stop fighting. She had fought for everything she had, and she would keep fighting to protect it. The empire was hers, and she would defend it with everything she had. The events of the past few weeks had forced Maria to evolve in ways she never thought possible. After the Salviati family had been dealt a major blow, the power dynamic in the city had shifted, but the feeling of unease still lingered in the air. Despite her victory, the peace she had hoped for was elusive. The war wasn't over, and she knew it. In the weeks following their retreat, the Salviati family had remained eerily silent. Maria had expected retaliation, but it never came. The tension in her office grew thicker as she waited for their next move, unsure of when or where they would strike again. The silence was unsettling. Alex, her most trusted advisor, had been working tirelessly to track any signs of movement, but it seemed the Salviatis were waiting for the perfect moment to make their next move. Every night, Maria stayed up late, combing through intelligence reports, studying financial documents, looking for any clue that could hint at the Salviatis' next move. Her paranoia grew with every passing day. The empire she had worked so hard to build felt fragile, as though everything could come crumbling down in an instant. Her allies reassured her, telling her she had made the right moves, that the Salviatis were on the defensive now, but Maria wasn't convinced. She had learned long ago that in this world, peace was often just the calm before the storm. One evening, as she sat at her desk, a message came through. It was from Alex. "We've got something," he wrote. "It's the Salviatis. They've moved, and they're coming for us." Maria's heart raced as she quickly dialed his number. "What's happening?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've got a lead," Alex responded, his voice tense. "They've been making moves under the radar, setting up illegal shipments through the city's ports. We think they're trying to smuggle in weapons, Maria. This is bigger than we thought." Maria felt the weight of the news settle heavily on her chest. Weapons meant they were preparing for a direct assault. The Salviatis were no longer just making business moves. They were preparing for a war. "I need to know everything," she said, her voice firm. "Prepare the team. We move out tonight. We shut this down before it escalates." "Understood," Alex replied. Maria's thoughts raced as she hung up the phone. She knew what had to be done. She had to act fast and decisively. The Salviatis were making their move, but they didn't know what was coming. Maria wasn't going to wait for them to strike first. She had learned that in this world, the one who hesitated was always the one who lost. That night, Maria met with her team, her most loyal and trusted allies. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would infiltrate the port, intercept the shipment, and eliminate any threats before they could do damage. Maria was no longer the hesitant leader she had once been. The time for diplomacy was over. She was prepared to fight, to protect her empire and everything she had built. "We hit them fast and hard," Maria said, her voice cold with determination. "We'll take their weapons, we'll take their shipment, and we'll make sure they never think about coming for us again." Her team nodded in agreement, the familiar sense of unity and purpose forming once again. There was no turning back now. As they made their way to the port, Maria's mind was sharp, calculating. She wasn't just a boss anymore. She was a strategist, a leader who knew how to manipulate every situation to her advantage. The Salviatis thought they could take what was hers, but they hadn't learned the most important lesson. Underestimating Maria Romano was the biggest mistake they could make. They arrived at the port under the cover of darkness. The air was thick with tension as Maria's team moved silently through the shadows, prepared for anything. The port was a maze of warehouses and shipping containers, a perfect setting for an ambush. Maria's heart pounded as they approached the target area, but her mind remained clear. Every step was calculated. Every move was planned. They reached the area where the Salviati shipment was waiting. Maria signaled for her men to spread out, covering every possible exit. The plan was in motion. As the Salviati operatives unloaded the crates, Maria's team struck. The confrontation was swift and decisive. They were outnumbered, but Maria's team was better prepared. Within minutes, they had seized control of the shipment and eliminated the Salviati forces, sending them a clear message. This was Maria's city, and no one would take it from her. As the last of the Salviati's men were rounded up, Maria stood in the shadows, watching as her team secured the shipment. The victory was theirs, but Maria knew this was only one battle in a much larger war. The Salviatis would be back, but she was ready. The empire she had fought so hard for was hers to protect, and she would do whatever it took to defend it. Her heart was cold, her resolve unshakable. Maria had won tonight, but the war was far from over. And as long as she was alive, she would fight to keep what was hers. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's continue with part 12 of today's story. The night after their successful operation at the port, Maria sat in her office, the weight of the victory settling heavily on her shoulders. The Salviati family had suffered a significant blow, but Maria knew that it was only a temporary setback. They were wounded, but not defeated. As the leader of her empire, Maria understood that this was a dangerous game, and the Salviatis would come back stronger than ever. Maria had no illusions. Every win brought more enemies, more challenges, and more risks. Her rise to power had made her a target, and the more she took control, the more she had to fight to hold on to it. But as she looked out over the city that she had come to rule, she felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in a long while, she was sure of one thing. She was not going to back down. She would protect her empire, her family, and herself, no matter the cost. The door to her office opened, and Alex walked in, his usual calm demeanor masking the tension in his eyes. "We've got a message," he said, his voice low. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She knew what this meant. The Salviatis had responded. "What did they say?" she asked, bracing herself. Alex handed her a piece of paper. "They're calling for a truce. They want to meet with you, face to face." Maria's eyes narrowed. A truce? It seemed too easy, too sudden. The Salviatis had just been defeated, and now they were asking for peace? It didn't add up. She could feel the suspicion creeping into her mind. Was this a trap? Or was it a genuine offer to negotiate? "What do you think?" she asked, turning to Alex. He hesitated, clearly thinking it over. "It's hard to say, but one thing's for sure. This isn't just about business. They want something more from you." Maria stood up, walking over to the window, staring out at the lights of the city. She had worked so hard to get to this point, to build an empire that was hers, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away. But the Salviatis had shown time and again that they played by their own rules, and she had no intention of letting them manipulate her. "Set up the meeting," she said, her voice firm. "I'll meet with them, but I won't show any weakness." Alex nodded, but Maria could see the concern in his eyes. "Be careful, Maria. They're dangerous. They might be offering peace now, but you don't know what they're really planning." Maria turned to him, her gaze steady. "I know exactly what they're planning, and I'm not afraid of them." The next day, Maria found herself sitting across from the Salviati family's representatives in a luxurious private dining room at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. The tension in the air was thick, the unspoken history between the families hanging over the table like a storm cloud. The Salviatis, once allies, had become her greatest rivals, and now they were sitting here, asking for peace. The man sitting across from her, a senior member of the Salviati family, was a slick, well-dressed figure. He didn't speak immediately, instead taking a moment to look at Maria, sizing her up as though she were still the same Maid he had once dismissed. His gaze was cold, calculating. "We've had our differences. Maria, he finally said, his voice smooth but filled with a quiet threat. But it's time to end this. The city is big enough for both our families. We can work together, share control, and make sure we both thrive. Maria leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. I don't work with people who try to destroy me, she said, her voice steady. Your family's actions have spoken for themselves. I don't trust you, and I'm not about to forget the war you've waged against me. The man's expression hardened, but he quickly masked it with a smile. I understand your hesitation, but think about it. If we continue down this path, we'll only destroy each other. We have a lot more to gain working together than we do fighting. The question is, Maria, can you be reasonable? Can you step back from the anger and see the opportunity? Maria's fingers drummed lightly on the table. She had heard all of this before. She knew the Salviatis, knew their tricks, their manipulations. They were playing the long game, trying to wear her down, to get her to second-guess her every move. But she wasn't going to fall for it. I don't need your offer, Maria replied, her voice sharp. What I need is respect, and you've shown me none. If you want peace, you'll have to prove it. Your family's actions speak louder than your words. The room fell silent, the weight of Maria's words hanging in the air. The man's smile faltered for just a second, but he quickly regained his composure. Very well, he said, his voice tinged with coldness. We'll see what happens next, Maria. But don't think this is over. It's just the beginning. Maria stood up, not bothering to hide her disdain. She didn't need to negotiate with them, and she didn't need their peace. The empire she had built wasn't for sharing. She would never back down from a fight. You've made your intentions clear, she said, turning to leave. But remember this, I don't stop fighting, and I will always protect what's mine. As she walked away, the weight of the decision she had just made settled over her. The Salviatis thought they had won a small victory by calling for peace, but Maria knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a much bigger battle, and she was ready to fight it. All over again, if necessary. The war was far from over, and Maria was determined to come out on top. The weeks after the tense meeting with the Salviati family were filled with uncertainty. Maria had made her stance clear, but the Salviatis were not ones to give up easily. She knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to strike again. However, instead of staying on the defensive, Maria decided to take control. She knew that the key to survival in this world was not just reacting to threats, but making the first move. Every day, she reviewed plans, reinforced alliances, and carefully monitored her enemies' moves. Maria had learned that leadership was not only about making decisions, but also about anticipating the moves of others. As the Salviatis remained quiet for a time, Maria was faced with a new challenge, her own family. Her mother, once a silent supporter of her rise to power, had begun questioning the choices Maria was making. You've changed, her mother said one evening, her tone heavy with concern. You're not the girl I raised. This life is taking something from you. Maria felt the sting of her mother's words. For so long, she had fought to be respected, to build an empire that no one could take from her. But now, with her mother's words echoing in her mind, Maria was forced to confront the question she had avoided for so long. What was the cost of all this power? She had sacrificed so much to get here. Her innocence, her relationships, even parts of herself. Was it worth it? Was all of this worth the loss of who she used to be? The next few days were spent in deep thought. Maria knew that she couldn't continue down this path without considering the impact of her decisions, not just on her empire, but on her soul. She had come so far, but could she continue to lead with the same fire in her heart? Could she keep fighting and still maintain her humanity? At the same time, Maria's leadership was being tested in other ways. The Salviatis, now regrouped and more dangerous than ever, had launched an attack on one of her strongest allies. Maria's reaction was swift. She gathered her inner circle and put a plan into motion. The Salviatis would not get away with this. She would strike back. That night, Maria and her team executed a counterattack, catching the Salviatis off guard. The move was calculated, precise, and executed without hesitation. The Salviatis were forced to retreat once again, but this time, Maria knew it wasn't over. They were learning her tactics, studying her every move, and she would have to stay one step ahead. As Maria sat in the aftermath of the battle, she realized that there was no turning back. The fight for control had become personal. This wasn't just about protecting her empire. It was about proving to herself, to her enemies, and to everyone around her that she would not be broken. Her empire had cost her a great deal, but it had also made her stronger. The sacrifices were real, but the rewards were undeniable. She had built something from nothing, and no one could take that away from her. The next morning, as Maria stood on the balcony of her mansion, overlooking the city, she made a decision. The Salviatis would not break her. They would not dictate her future. She would take back control of her life and her destiny. She would no longer be a prisoner to the fear of losing everything. She would lead with strength, with honor, and with conviction. As she looked out at the sprawling city below her, Maria felt the weight of her choices, but also a sense of peace. She had made it this far by trusting her instincts, by trusting herself. And now, she would continue to build, to protect, and to fight, not just for her empire, but for the woman she had become. Maria was no longer just a maid who had risen to power. She was Maria Romano, a woman who had fought for everything she had, and she would never stop fighting. The Salviatis were just one chapter in her story, and she was determined to write her own ending. The game was far from over, but Maria was ready for whatever came next. Her empire was hers to protect, and she would defend it with everything she had.